On a normal December morning last year, downtown Sioux Falls was turned upside down when the Copper Lounge building collapsed. It took the life of 24-year-old Ethan McMahon, who was working inside that building, and it trapped 22-year-old Emily Fodness inside for several hours. It is a day no one can forget, especially the first responders who arrived at the scene. As we approach the first anniversary, KSFY News reporter Erica Lee spoke with some of the men and women who were in the thick of that collapse trying to save lives that day. It's a story you'll only see on KSFY.
As hard as Sioux Falls Fire Rescue trains and simulates different disasters, they say nothing could ever come close to that day. And as for paramedics, it was a waiting game, something they're also not used to doing.
That morning, the call came in as a building collapsed.
We responded from Central. We were just getting back from a call.
We've had calls like that come in before, and the first thing that went through my mind was a car hit a building and went through.
And on the way there, I just remember we had no idea what we were going into.
As updates came in,
It sounded like an explosion. There's debris all over the street. So at that time, I realized that this is going to be more than just a car through the building.
the first update came from Captain Kevin Sona. He was first on the scene December 2nd.
Turned the corner and we could actually still see the dust settling on the road when we pulled up.
Captain Scott Anderson was next.
Saw the dust cloud was still in the air, and I realized that this is a true structural collapse.
Sona began doing a 360 around the building while the rest of his crew began evacuating and pushing back the crowds of people starting to gather.
Surprisingly, the people on the street backed up were really quiet. It was really actually quiet on the road. For a scene like that, the fire alarm was going off and that was just about it on the building.
There wasn't much time to process the scene. Anderson began giving out assignments. By the time Captain Clint DeBoer's crew, Rescue 5, arrived on the scene in between Battalion 1 and Engine 51, he thought he had a good idea of what to expect, but
initially it's a shock to actually see what had happened. I mean, there was cars on the street that were buried under rubble. There's people running around. It was pretty chaotic to start with.
And it was just a moment of, wow, there used to be a building here.
the first 3 fire rescue crews set up incident command and in the chaos had a place to start.
Our first priorities are always rescue when we arrive on scene, no matter what type of call it is.
Because Anderson got into position on 10th and Mall Avenue.
PD and a couple bystanders approach me and say at least one person is in the building, and then a few minutes later it was confirmed 2 people were trapped inside the building.
And you start to realize that, hey, we're gonna dig in. We're here for the long haul.
But fire rescue also had to keep themselves safe. The department has 2 structural specialists on staff with expertise in these types of situations.
When they arrived on scene, we were comfortable going underneath the pile, but until they arrived on scene, we kind of stayed on top of the pile with debris removal.
Incident command told the paramedics about the victims. They set up their gear. Then it was a waiting game.
It was painfully brutal to me to watch these rescue guys taking literally handfuls of rubble at a time to try to get to this individual.
Once the engineers gave fire rescue the okay,
We kind of split into 2 rescue groups. I was put in charge of Rescue Group 2, and our main priority and goal was to go underneath the collapse from the backside and try to get a good idea where Ethan was buried under the rubble and try to dig him out.
and even though DeBoer's crew had their assignment and the all clear from the structural specialists,
It's dangerous, and I had a lot of people questioning what we were doing there. And they would never do it out loud, but you could see in their eyes that, hey, they were worried about what was going on.
after all the hard work,
Several times, we almost got her.
You could see parts of her body, and they were holding on to her hand and talking to her.
Goosebumps. It was unbelievable.
When you're doing the work, you actually don't think about the people watching and stuff, but when they brought her out, it seemed like everything had stopped as they were bringing her out, and it was a really good feeling to hear people cheer. And
They brought her to me. She was just covered in dust, and my main thing was keeping her warm and trying to get the dust out of her eyes and give her words of comfort, because I can't imagine what she went through. Even though she was able to communicate, how scary that had to be.
We were all buried underneath on the backside, and we started hearing the cheering and came over the radio that they had found a victim. So that's a big relief, but we had one goal in mind, and that was to dig into where Ethan was buried. And so we just had to stay on task.
So they kept digging. Then
Everybody that was on the pile, we kind of reset in the fashion that we all got together as a group, and then we made a plan to start searching for the second victim, who was Ethan.
but it wasn't the outcome they wanted.
We have some search specialists that found him still under some rubble.
After Emily's rescue and the rescue of her dog Milo,
There are such bittersweet moments because it felt like so many miracles happened over here, but you still have him over there. It's like, can you just pull off one more for him, you know?
It's really hard. We always want the best outcome, and a lot of the time we're planning for the best, and then when something like that happens, it's very hard.
You get a little bit of sense of relief, but at the same time it's anguish because there's nothing anybody can do.
That was sad. It touches you.
one year later, the responders say they think back to that day often. For each of them, specific moments stand out.
When we pulled up on scene and, there was still a dust plume in the air.
I'll just never forget that scene in my mind.
I was in the battalion car. When we got out, there was a line of people on the debris pile when they brought Emily down, and the citizens started cheering and hollering. I had no idea there was that many people up in that parking ramp watching.
Those last minutes when they were getting Emily out,
That was easily the brightest moment.
this is it. This is what we've been working for, and it all came together right there. So that was the moment. I mean, I will never forget that.
And if that day couldn't have started unlike any other, Captain Anderson normally works on Rescue 5, but was filling in on Battalion 1 that morning. And for Paramedics Plus, many of the crews who showed up here that day weren't even supposed to be working. They were supposed to be training new hires. By the way, I also reached out to Sioux Falls Police to see if they wanted to be part of this story, but they declined that interview request. In Sioux Falls, Erica Lee, KSFY News.
Nearly 1 year later, this story underscores the importance of first responders here in our community. And of course, our thoughts are also with the McMahon and Fodness families tonight.